This is what it was like filming a brand-funded documentary with a budget of circa $370,000 across 5 weeks and 4 different countries. If you've already watched part 1 and 2 of this 4-parter, you'll know that it was a lot of work to get to this point. In order to make this budget go the distance and still keep the quality levels up, even though we'd spoken to specialists in their relative fields from all over the world, we'd narrowed it down to these 4 countries purely because of cost and time. But mostly cost, because time is also cost, I guess. Another cost-saving exercise in an effort for us to make these films the best they could possibly be was on the kit we were working with. Detail own a lot of their own kit, as do I, so we were able to put it on the job for nothing. Even though this definitely isn't the best practice when working, we really believed in the series we were making, and for sure we were going to create some next-level real work out of it for everyone involved. We'd be shooting on a hybrid of Red V Raptors and a Red Komodo, bringing along tripods, a gimbal rig, Aperture 1200D, 600D, MT Pro, 6 MCs, 2 B7Cs, an Amaran 200D and 2 light strips that we never used, Forza 60B, a 150 light dome for the key, various diffusion, bounce, blackout, the bare minimum of stands, some rigging was to be expected, plug adapters, extension drums, tape, tools, bongo ties, screws, croc clips, clapperboard, sound kit, and some foliage. Although I bought my larger monitor on the England stretch of shoots, we opted for no director's monitor abroad because of weight and space. Fortunately, I could use the Red app on my phone and iPad to monitor when needed, or for us all to use when setting up. In addition to this, I did decide to do something outrageously irresponsible with my finances. But because my fee for this project was a healthy one, I could justify it to myself. With less and less time and resources in the schedule across the project to make these look truly beautiful, I thought a quick, easy win to make the mundane look special would be to shoot this whole project on anamorphics. I also told myself that shooting anamorphic would really complement the future-gazing feel of this project. We weren't now going to be able to afford to rent in anamorphics for the whole length of this project. So I made the decision to buy a set of DZO Pavo anamorphics, taking them along for free. Anamorphics go in and out of trend just like any other look, but I love them. And I'd seen some material shot on these that I thought looked mega, so spoke to my friends at CVP about testing some out. Then the good people at DZO to see if they could rush ship me a set made up of a 28mm, a 40mm, and a 75mm. They arrived with just 1 working day to spare before our first shoot day, and both relieved and excited to have made it this far in the project. We loaded up the van, ready to head to our first series of interviews. Ahead of packing the van though, mostly Shrey and myself had spent a long day prepping all the kit ahead of our shoots out of the UK. Even though this first week was going to be in the south of England and Scotland, we wanted to give ourselves the same limitations we were going to be under kit-wise for America and Barcelona in the coming weeks, and use this as a test run for those, seeing if there was anything we didn't end up using or were missing, and test the practicalities of shifting a load of heavy gear around. Even though our crew in the States was going to be with less people than we had for the shoots back home, we were going to be flying a lot, so weight restrictions were going to be an issue, as well as responsibility of the different bits of kit. Charging batteries and backing up footage, this all needed to be considered. We also had to submit a carnet ahead of flying, and if you don't know what that is, then you should watch this video next to learn all about travelling for work. During our kit prep day at mine, Shrey had the fun job of weighing and noting down every piece of kit's serial number for the carnet. We then organised it distributed by weight and then numbered and colour-coded each case, adding that to the list, with the aim that by the end of this job, we'd be a well-oiled, efficient machine and every bit of kit would always be accounted for, in the correct case and weighing the correct weight. Week 1 of shooting, although only 4 days, was exhausting, stressful and full of plenty of problems to encounter along the way. We did get some decent interviews though, a sprinkling of useful B-roll, shot in some awesome locations, met some lovely people and had a couple nice meals. Still, there's just never enough time. During the time that the schedule had kept being postponed whilst we waited for sign-off, we'd also lost Will as our cinematographer to another shoot. So for the first week, we were in the capable and ruggedly manly hands of Dan. We actually ended up having 4 different DPs across this doc. But as someone who DPs myself and who had a strong idea of how I wanted it all to look, this didn't stress me out too much as the lighting brief had been quite clear and we all knew what we were aiming for. We began by travelling to East London to capture our first 2 interviews. Both interviewees were fantastic, but as well as having limited time in the location to set up on account of what we could afford, it also doubled as a dance school and part of a local university. So even though the venue had said certain areas were out of bounds to the students, we kept having to stop for sound when interrupted by passers-by making noise. For all the interviews, we were opting for a simple 2-camera setup, both locked off, one wide and one close-up. As detail owner Komodo, I'd floated the idea of having a third camera unmanned on a motorized slider. But after some discussion about it with Will, we'd opted not to bring it because, again, we were considering weight and space when traveling, but also because we were already super tight for time and crew. Having this extra bit of kit to set up and look after would probably be unrealistic in our schedule. I also want to talk about the general rules we followed in the approach for lighting these interviews. And I need to give a shout out to Aperture, the absolute legends that are not only the sponsor of this video, but are the creators of 90% of the tools we used to light this project. Double diffing was the name of the game. On all these interview setups, we'd have either an Aperture 1200D or 600D as the key, using their 150 light dome with full diffusion in it. We'd then hang a second layer of large diffusion as close to the subject as possible for a lovely soft wraparound. On these UK shoots, because we had a few sneaky extras, on occasion we'd use the Amaran 22C for a hairlight, but over the whole project probably used the Amaran 200D more often for this. It was then a case of either using neg or bounce to create the right level of contrast ratio. We wanted a bit of shape and drama on these, but we were shooting for a brand, so nothing too moody. Then, when a location didn't lend itself to natural interest, we'd use whatever else we had left in the arsenal to create that interest in the background. I'm a lover of as much boomed sound as possible over lapel mics. I also always encourage sound blankets when doable. Something that the locked-off shots allowed us for were to capture plates for cleanup afterwards in order to allow us to have both sound and lighting equipment in as close as we needed to achieve better sound capture and a softer wrap when we wanted to. We used this technique a lot. Day 2, we headed to Oxford. It was one of those could take 2 hours, could take 4 kind of trips. And we didn't have budget for hotels on this leg of the trip, so I left mine at 5 a.m. Brutal. We were incredibly lucky with the weather whilst Dan and I ran around the city getting our first bit of juicy B-roll. That night, back home in London, as well as all other nights on this shoot, I went over the schedule and plan for the next day. The subject questions and lines they'd mentioned in the pre-interview to make sure that we got from them in some similar capacity again on the day. Day 3, we were shooting in the iconic Tate Modern in central London. Another early start in some pissing rain. What a lovely day. We had a bit of a nightmare here. The Tate had told us we'd be safe for sound in the area we were shooting in, as it was before the gallery opened to the public. But just as we were set to start shooting, we started getting cleaners hoovering on the open plan floor above. Then installers drilling, hammering and loudly chatting as they walked into our filming space. The half-asleep location manager that we were paying an extortionate amount of money to shoot there for a few hours was not much help. I had words, and runner Louis and camera assist Stray were posted at various entrances trying to do the location manager's job of keeping our area quiet. But the whole thing obviously held us up and looked really unprofessional in front of our contributor. Now that we knew this area wasn't going to work for the next interview, we made a mad dash to a different location in the building and tried to set up sharpish because we were now really behind. Fortunately, our next contributor was safe from sound interruptions and was an absolute dream on camera. We were still late though, so we rapidly packed down and headed to north of the river to film our third contributor of the day in their surgery in the only part of London with 0 parking. It was tight for time and space, but we did it. Took the van to a car park near King's Cross Station, said goodbye to 3 of the crew members and headed for the train to Edinburgh, where I copied cards and backed up in the hotel room before a cheeky iron brew with Nathan in the bar to mark the occasion of being in Scotland. Edinburgh, with the friendly Vanessa, went well. We got a bunch more B-roll, and then as we were packing up late, I was juggling taking a briefing call with an agency in Morocco for another potential job in the new year, all whilst wheeling kit out to the taxi. The life of a freelancer. On the fast train back to London, where we were returning for 36 hours before heading to the airport to make our way to the US, we had come to terms with some anxiety-inducing news. Everyone's passports with their shiny new visas had arrived back from the American embassy. Every one of the 4 US crew, except for Nathan. Whilst 3 out of 4 is not bad, Will was actually joining us on the second day of the shoot, so it was looking like it was just going to be Helen and I lugging all that kit and doing the shoot on the first day. Helen stressed her tits off for the bulk of the journey, whilst I WhatsApped various people I knew who might have a working visa and might be available last minute, as well as putting a post out on the Insta. By the time we reached King's Cross in London, we'd confirmed our favourite Welsh compadre, Dylan. He was going to save the day. Having been filming a doc in the States earlier that year, he already had all the permissions he needed to come along and could make himself available. Before our first day off at the start of this long stint of shoots, our train got into London some 20 minutes late, which meant when I got back to the car park with most of the kit and to pick up my van, it was locked. I was fuming, knackered and fuming. I wasn't even meant to be driving in the first place. I was just trying to be helpful when plans had changed. And now this? After lots of failed phone calls, I had no choice but to head home and travel back to collect it in the morning. I headed back in more pissing English rain first thing the next morning, then headed home to do the backup from yesterday's shoot and enjoy my semi-day off before heading to the airport the next day. America was nuts. Interviews were interviews, clever people, good chats, nice lighting setups, and plenty more plates. The stuff around the work, though, let's talk about that.
There are infinite highlights, mate. The sunrise just outside of Denver, we went out to shoot the mountains. We shot on some pretty cool locations, did we? No, we didn't.
No, not really.
Not really.
We made the best of what was available to us. We ate some good barbecue.
We had some great barbecue. We shot some great sunrises. I thoroughly enjoyed using your lenses. We just kept the tone and the vibes light and took the piss the entire time.
The whole thing was exhausting. I think on paper, traveling between 5 different cities in 6 days is quite achievable. In real life, it's
In the run-up to Christmas, we were away for 6 days and we had far too much kit for a small crew because we were just trying to keep lean and determined, and if it wasn't for our cracking sense of humours, I think we would have fallen out more.
Low lights of America.
I can think of one.
Go on.
Having to do all the driving.
First off, I was meant to be one of 3 drivers, but Nathan was one of those 3, so he was out. And for the first day, Will wasn't there, so he was out. But then whilst halfway over the Atlantic Ocean, I realised I'd forgotten to pack my driving licence. Helen was already at breaking point, so this was going to be really fun news to deliver to her. I chose to hold on to it for the remainder of the flight, feeling sicker and sicker about the situation, trying to think of solutions but not coming up with any, because there weren't any. We'd be okay with taxis for the first part of tomorrow, but then we had a 5-hour drive to the next location, so that one was going to be interesting. Again, I headed social media to see if I could help in remedying the situation, and a lot of you Texas legends got in touch with offers and advice, so thanks for that. But Helen did what producers do best and fixed it with the bougiest of catered Wi-Fi bus rides from Dallas to Austin.
When you do work with a smaller crew, the amount of headspace that takes for you to just be thinking about kit being set up and put down the whole time is a lot. But it was wicked, mate. Wouldn't want to do it with anyone else.
Well, that's very sweet of you to say. I would do it with other people, but in addition, I would do it I think if we had, it's always a question of time and money, but to do what we did, I would have loved to have done that over 2 weeks and with at least 2 additional crew members.
Would have been really lovely to just spend a bit more time in each city. Just a little half day in between, gather your thoughts and back at the footage rather than just having to do everything on the move. Traveling
with the amount of kit we had was an expensive ball ache. And this part of filmmaking is the part I hate.
Yeah, boy.
Flights. So many flights. Not good for the environment, not good for me, and not good for the budget. There were a few airlines that gave us discounts on our baggage though, because we were able to prove to them that we were filmmakers. So if you're traveling with kit, always worth mentioning and giving it a go. It didn't become any funner, but we became a well-oiled kit-carrying machine.
Lot of choice.
And Will had come up with a genius idea to use these straps on our cases. So every time the luggage came out of the airport, we'd spot it straight away. Sounds simple, but it worked really well. And even though we had air tags in most of the luggage, I still felt a massive sigh of relief every time I saw those rainbow-coloured straps coming around the corner on the conveyor belt at luggage claim. On the Friday after we wrapped, we took Helen and Dylan to the airport before Will and I went and treated ourselves to an off-the-budget 24 hours in Denver, and used our jet lag as an opportunity to go and shoot some beautiful beam roll at sunrise before we headed back to the UK. Over the Christmas break, there were more prep meetings ahead of the shoots in the new year. The week after we got back from the States, we got sign off on 2 of our 3 real-world protagonists. Even though we'd already done 2 weeks shooting, we were mostly covered because I've been getting our experts to respond to multiple possible case scenarios and say various different names in different intonations to cover us in the edit. The client had changed their mind on some of the selections though, so Helen reached out to our casting agency again to start looking for subjects in Barcelona, where we were going to begin shooting some more interviews in the new year. My first week in January was spent having catch-ups with Helen, writing shot lists, communicating with art department and VFX some more, speaking with Will and the gaffer Al, going on recce's ahead of the dramatisations. Then, on our weekly catch-up call with the client, they dropped an insane bombshell. Despite giving us the go-ahead to start shooting over a month ago now, the boss's boss had only really just been made aware of the project, and they didn't like the way it was going. They wanted it to be more product focused, less story focused. They didn't want to talk about half of the stuff that we'd talked about. So never mind the 3 months of development and the month of travel and shooting we'd already done then. Contextually, in the middle of this project, this was soul-distressingly horrific news. Both Helen and myself and everyone else involved had really gone above and beyond to make this project the best it could possibly be. And now it was being ripped apart before we were even halfway. But aside from the month that we'd already shot, flights and crew had already been booked and paid for the following weeks. A small fortune spent on art department. Location houses confirmed, catering sorted. It was too late to pull the plug at this point. After a very long meeting taken on my laptop on the floor of my mum's living room the night before I was due to do a recce somewhere down south, I managed to talk the client off the ledge. However, I really felt like it should have been them that were trying to talk me off the ledge. It really was very upsetting, but I kept my cool and tried to convince everyone that it will be all right in the end. I was feeling very done. We left the call with not certainty, but with a few ideas. Firstly, the client was going to go through the transcripts from the interviews so far and see what parts they thought could be relevant to this new direction. Secondly, I was going to go through the dramatisations and see what we could use, repurpose or tweak to work with this new direction. And thirdly, and most promisingly, the client was going to try harder to push back so we could just deliver what we'd already set out to deliver and not have to Frankenstein something average out of something that was lined up to be great. On the Monday, with another cinematographer, my guy Callum, and a different assistant, we flew to Barcelona.
Can't say I've missed this in the slightest.
Travelling out the night before, our first shoot day began with a healthy 5 a.m. alarm because I wanted to shoot some B-roll at sunrise with our local Barcelona case study. Helen had been communicating with her ahead of time, getting shooting location options for our day with her, and no one likes getting up early, but I think it was definitely worth it for the light. As a paid case study, we had access to her for a lot longer than the rest of our subjects. So after a lengthy interview in a challengingly tight space, we headed out around a few spots in her local area getting B-roll for the film.
Yes, acting.
We had a few ideas of where we were heading, but did all of this without any permits or permissions ahead of time. So when shooting in this store, for example, I just went into the store owners and asked them if it was okay if we filmed there, and they were happy to let us shoot. The next morning, we headed early to a rented location to set up for 2 more interviews with some more experts. As with England and Scotland, we also managed to get a local soundie for this portion of the shoot, taking the pressure off us a little bit there. And it was back to England for another day of interviews, 3 this time in one location house, which did make things a lot easier to utilise our time. And we had a few more crew members, which really helped. Shooting week 4 was our penultimate shooting week. On the few off days between being on location, I had a bunch more Zoom catch-ups with various heads of department. I also struggled to work on some art department help myself, fighting with my friend AI again, as the art team was spread a little thin on the ground. I shot a bunch of macro shots I wanted to capture for one of the episodes with Shrey in my living room, whilst I had access to these awesome probe lenses I had on loan from Lauer for a specific shot I wanted to capture in the Dramatisations.
Any good?
This was a big week for this project, our most expensive week by far, with a lot of moving parts. On set, we scaled up from a crew of what had been, for the bulk of the shoot days so far, a 4 to 6 people team, to a team of 17, with art department making up the bulk of that. We had producer Helen, director, cinematographer, camera assistant, gaffer, spark, hair and makeup, wardrobe stylist, visual effects supervisor, art director, 2 props masters, prop person, 2 art assistants, construction, and a driver, as well as 13 different cast members. It was a long but rewarding week. I go into weeks like these a little bit nervous and definitely overthinking everything, but excited too, particularly at this point in the project. We were getting really close to the end. At least we hoped we were. The curveball the client had thrown us in January still hadn't been fully resolved. I spent the nights before going over my shot lists I'd already prepared, as well as looking through the rough boards I put together for the client to get sign-off ahead of time, as they weren't going to be on set for any of these shoot days. I play the scenes through in my head and try to think of any last-minute get-out-of-jail-free cards that we might be able to capture on the day that would help us in the edits. We shot in some incredible locations, all of which I've been to recce in person with Max, the art director, in our first week back at the start of the month. But seeing everything as it was intended, with full art department and everyone doing their thing to make this look banging, it really warmed my heart. All of the stresses leading to this point were going to have been worth it. We're going to make something truly captivating, not only in the incredible things we get to share through the interviews with our experts we've been doing, but with these visuals too. The VFX lead for post, Jakub, came on set to supervise VFX, and it was awesome to have someone with such a vastly different skill set to mine on set to see and learn how he thought about things, whilst both looking out for any potential problems, but also looking for ways to enhance and improve as we went. As always, we could have done with more time, more crew. A first AD would have been really good to have on these, and a location manager on a number of them too. But also, as always, the cause and answer to our problems was budget. Even on a budgeted production of this scale, as you can see, when there's been this amount of shoot days, hotels, catering, travel, crew, and locations to pay for, the budget quickly gets eaten up. Which is why for the final shoot week, a week with actually only 2 on-camera shooting days, and some 700 plus miles of driving, we were back down to a skeleton crew of 4. I do hope that these videos that I make for you, the people of the internet, don't come across always as too negative. I want to tell these experiences as honestly as possible, and it's easy to get hung up on the stresses and strains of a job. But I want to be super clear that there are loads of really fun and enjoyable moments along the way too. On this last portion of the shoot with Dylan, Helen, myself, and 2 local gaffers, we had lots of fun and laughs on the drives, as we often do. Having dinner in some out of the ordinary to my usual weeknight places is always fun. Satisfaction in making a bland setting look more interesting feels great. Conducting a moving interview with interesting people who are sharing their very personal stories with you is also super rewarding. And remember, we're getting paid to do all this too, which if you told that to 14-year-old me, he'd have thought that you were nuts. After we'd shot our last interview up with one of our real-life case studies, and quite honestly, the nicest guy I've ever met, Cuds.
As a potential rap, yeah!
We still didn't know if we were going to have to head back in a few weeks to start shooting pickups, as the discussion with the client about this new direction still hadn't drawn any definitive conclusions. After having dropped the van off at Detail HQ, I got on the train home, happy, relieved, and excited to finally be getting stuck into the edit, regardless of what might lie ahead. If you're still here, leave a comment below to let me know you made it this far. And if you want to learn about the post-production side of this job and how we resolved everything with the client, then make sure to subscribe for more semi-helpful tips and interesting insider industry knowledge.